Hi, everybody. Don't mind me just vibing to the intro. Hello. Welcome to this editing live stream. Similar structure to what we did last week. We've got myself, got Vincent. We've got SD Howard joining us here shortly. We're talking about improving self-editing skills and usage of words today. So we're going to be going through a few things, common things that we see when we're looking to edit our own work, when we're helping other people edit their works, very common things, and how to fix them. So anything you want to add, Vincent?
No, that hit the nail on the head for me.
Amazing. All right. Well, so the first thing that we're going to talk about here today is needless exaggeration, overselling the story with flowery language. So in your experience, Vincent, when you're editing your work, do you find a lot of this, and what does it look like?
Yeah, actually, this is probably my biggest problem, I would say, at least with my last project, which was historical fiction. There's a tendency to lean into this kind of writing because you want to appear more professional. You want to set the scene. That's always the excuse is I'm setting the scene. I'm bringing my reader into this. Instead, a lot of times, the more and more detail you give, the more and more your reader is getting dragged out of the story in a lot of cases because they're paying attention less and less by sentence. So think about that sweet spot and that balance and ask yourself as you're editing, is this actually going to engage my reader in the same way that an exciting film might, or an exciting other book that you like might do it? And yeah, don't give yourself the freedom to have too much detail or too much flowery language, but just enough.
Yeah, if that paragraph where you're describing that particular moment gets to be too long, your reader's going to get bored and start doing this thing that my mom tells me she does all the time. Every time we'll come to book club, if there's a book that we're reading, she goes, I ended up just skimming like half of it. There was way too much detail about like certain spaces that I just didn't need to know. Or sometimes this also can look like way too much inner thought monologue.
Yeah.
Too much monologuing that isn't really adding anything to the story, isn't moving along the plot, isn't telling you anything new about the character. It just all seems very kind of scatterbrained here, there, everywhere. Now, if that tells you something about the character, if your character is neurodivergent, for example, and you really need to like set that scene, maybe we're dealing with something different here. But like Vincent said, finding that sweet spot of paragraph length and description is going to be key. And one of the ways to help finding that, so self-editing is one thing, but we also, with this one in particular, a lot of times you're going to be too close to your work and you're going to want someone else to look at it and give you an honest answer like, okay, here it is. Did you get bored? Where did you get bored? Where did I lose you? Because that's going to be important, especially even if we're thinking about things like world building, right? We can very easily nerd out about the places that we create and just go off. But we want to make sure we're keeping the reader engaged because that's who we're telling the story to. The other thing too here, flowery language. I like this adjective. Sometimes I'll have the tendency to try to use big words for big words' sake. And it looks very obviously forced. Like if you've got big words and if you're going to use them throughout the entire book, that's one thing. If you have one particular character that is just very verbose and eloquent, look at those big words I'm using, look at that. Then that's another thing too. So you just have to kind of, there is a degree of nuance to it. But with this one is one of the instances where it's hardest to self-edit, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And like last live stream, we were talking about adverbs and that there's something going around saying that adverbs can't be used effectively and that they often contribute to being flowery language. And they totally can, because you throw in adverbs when you're trying to flesh out detail about how an action's being done. So if you're just dropping these big words or dropping these extra descriptors without actual purpose in the story, then it feels flowery. If there's a lot of purpose behind it, though, then it can be used very effectively. And you stop the book from becoming the opposite of flowery, which is just too little detail. You can't really get the reader engrossed if you don't have enough detail. So there is a balance to find, and it's different.
Something that's constantly going on in my head, especially when I'm writing dialogue, is to beware of using adverbs. So-and-so said da-da-da-lee, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that can be too much. Like occasionally you can use that. But ultimately, and this is really great advice that someone once gave me, said is a perfectly fine descriptor and is often the best option.
Yeah. Yeah.
Vincent said. Stephen said.
Yeah. Yeah. I abide by that as well. I think I just use said exclusively, unless there's a very specific instance where I want to stress something else. But yeah, I'm
Yeah.
with you there.
Adverbs, you got to be careful. Now, other with said and dialogue, you can also choose other verbs, just regular verbs. He mumbled, he yelled, etc. But you got to be careful of those adverbs, the ones that end in the ly, that can sometimes just be a little bit too much.
Definitely.
All right. I think we've got an author coach in the wings ready to come in and join us.
Hey.
Hey.
Amazing.
Everybody.
Goes good. You have actually great timing. We have another question here, and I would love for you to start off with your answer to this question. So, overused metaphors, old wisdom, and cliches. Like, cliche is a great literary tool. There's a reason it has a name, but there's also a reason that it has an annoying name. I don't know if you guys know the history of the word cliche, but I'm going to tell you anyway.
Ooh, yes,
super fun.
Do.
It has to do with the way that things were printed and pressed and the sound that the machine makes when it was pressing down the words. So it's actually also an onomatopoeia. So you've got some literary term inception going on here. So the sound it would make would go kind of like cliche, cliche, cliche. And so it's the overuse of something, the doing it over and over again, that makes it a cliche, makes it kind of annoying for those who sit around hearing the same thing all the time. So yeah.
Makes so much sense. I figured either that or someone's kid was saying the same thing, like, why? But it was like a French version of it. Makes sense now. Yeah, I think so, like, for cliches specifically, like, it is one of those things that when it's overdone, it drives people nuts. But when used strategically, thoughtfully, and purposefully, and not in large quantities, then it actually works out really well. Because, and I say the same thing for tropes, right? Everybody loves the tropes. Everybody knows the cliche of, like, really anything that is Hallmark. Hallmark is itself a cliche. And people still love it. People will eat up them holiday movies all day long. I know this because my wife waits for me to leave so that way she can indulge in the Hallmark movies.
Yes. Well, I think we're kind of reaching a fine line here between, we've got cliche and we've also got tropes.
Yep.
What would you say is the blurry difference between the two?
The blurry difference is that tropes are things that people look for in books because that's how they tell that they'll like it. Yeah. Cliches are things that you can kind of use in books. Like, well, I wouldn't recommend using this one, but this is the typical cliche of, she let go of the breath that she didn't know she was holding.
No,
that one drives me nuts. Absolutely bonkers. Never heard it. You need to read more YA. Or hang out in all of the author groups on Facebook, because that is something that is very. And I one of the books that I just got, it had it. I was like, oh, it did it. Almost made it through the whole book with that one. So there's those. I mean, the cliches tend to be turn of phrases, like actual sayings that we're used to. The tropes are genre expectations. Yes, please.
Okay, so we've got, for example, and they all lived happily ever after.
Yep.
What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? These are typically going to be dialogue phrases that your characters might say. That all that glitters isn't gold. Please. A lot of these are also can be like crossover with idioms a little bit. Oh, don't get your knickers in a twist. Oh, I don't know about you guys. I say that every day.
All the time.
Obviously.
All the time. The one that I stole from oh yeah.
It is what it is.
It is what it is. All's fair in love and war.
See, now the way that you can take these cliches and make them a little new is like it's fantasy. So like as a fantasy author, I have multiple creatures. So I could say Trifel got your tongue. And if a Trifel's got your tongue, it's a 3-headed lizard beast. So you're probably dead at that point. So you know, you can take those, don't just do them for verbatim, put a little bit of a twist on it, little bit of a spin, and that will make it a little newer for that particular reader. They'll be like, oh, I see what they did there. And they're smiling as it was like, you know, oh, she let out her breath again. She blacks out a lot because she doesn't remember holding these. So I'm concerned for her mental health at this point. Like, she okay? Yeah. And for the tropes, those are almost genre expectations. They are expected in certain books. Like if you're doing a fantasy novel, the trope is that there's probably going to be a mentor and they're probably going to get killed off within the first book, leaving the poor soul stranded without information that they desperately needed that only the mentor knew. Gandalf. So those are the types of things that you can look at, but also you want to take those and see if you can twist them. One of people's favorite things about my wolf, Mandar, in my book is that he's a wolf who can turn into a human versus just having a human who can turn into a wolf. So it's a fun spin on the whole like werewolf shifter trope that people have really enjoyed. So think about what is the trope? How can I break it and make it into something that's new for my book?
Yeah, you saying that made me think too about using cliches in a way that's purposeful. And especially if you're writing, let's say like third person and you need the narration to be more professional or, you know, believable. You want to avoid using cliches in that way unless you can put a spin on them. And it's also an opening to have like more creative freedom in terms of thinking of your own kind of illusion or your own metaphor, or maybe a place for humor even. But in dialogue, cliches can actually be great because then it makes the dialogue more realistic because people use them so often. Cliches are there for a reason because people say them a lot. So if you want your dialogue to be believable, there is a place for them in there for sure.
Yep. Mackenzie, what are your thoughts on that one?
I would say just be wary of overuse, but also at the same time, I think it would be absolutely hilarious if you had a character that spoke in a lot of overused cliches. Like I'm imagining like a YA Hallmark romance novel where the aunt is always like, well, you know, when life gives you lemons. Like I think that would be hilarious. I'd read that book.
I kid you not. When I was first kind of starting to try and get paid for my writing, I took a gig for Texties, and so it was text message based storytelling. And
I think that's a title for an app, but continue.
It is not the best option that they probably could have gone with. It's probably why I don't see a lot of them now. But I was like, you know what would be fun to take the tropes that are in these different genres and really lean into them and make it almost a satire. It's a comedy. And so like I had like the roided up like Russian guy named Pain. And then I had like the badass vampire chick, Talia. I had the smart aleck gunslinger zombie killer guy. I mean, and I leaned into these things so that way they were so on trope. It was ridiculous. But that was the point. And it was a lot of fun to write. So like if you're going to do something like that, don't do it half-assed. Go all in, go all the way with it, and then take it further, because then it's going to just be funny, especially if you, if you stop before that, then it just looks like you don't know what you're doing.
So I guess consistency is key.
Yes, absolutely. Have to be consistent.
Be mindful of what you're doing and how you're using it across the board.
Yes.
Across the entire book.
Don't hold your breath and then let it out later once you've remembered. Don't do that. All right. This is probably one of my personal favorite ones, is vary the sentence structure, length, stylization, and personification.
Mhm.
So what are your guys' thoughts on this before I go into full editor mode?
I like varying sentence structure. And for me, this particularly looks like length, because I like to have, at least in my book, it's told from the perspective, one viewpoint perspective of the main character. And so a lot of it'll be inner monologue where she'll literally just say one word, she'll go crap or oh shoot. And like that's one sentence. And then sometimes she'll have these really reflective moments that even, you mix it up a little bit within. I'm thinking of a very specific scene.
I don't have an answer for that. Is there something else I can help with?
And there you go.
Well,
Siri
my friends,
has
is
some
how
thoughts.
Skynet takes over.
There you go. That's my initial thought on that one.
Yeah, I think that having consistency, like you said before about the last topic, is kind of important here as well, because that's sort of how you develop a style. But then again, consistency is different than lack of variation, and lack of variation is kryptonite in this scenario.
Becomes very unengaging, becomes very boring. If you're using the exact same sentence structure like a list or putting because in between everything, your reader is going to lose focus. And plus, when you vary your sentence structure and stylization, it's going to read more like, I almost want to say melodic and kind of like a song, and it develops like this rhythm to it, even though it's not repetitive. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah. It's interesting too, the difference between, I'm going to go back again to like third person versus first person, because if you're in a first person narration, then there is some sort of consistency in how you're even writing the non-dialogue parts. And you could sort of chalk up different things like, oh, they keep leaning on this sentence structure because that's how they think in their head. And so there's a lot of different nuances and reasons to be more consistent or less consistent. But even then, you still have to make it engaging for the reader. And you should only pick a couple things that develop that consistency, because they'll get the picture. They'll understand that that's their style.
Yep. And I love, Mackenzie, what you brought up about the music. So the way that I describe to people as an editor when I'm talking to them about how a sentence structure should flow over a paragraph or multiple paragraphs is, I love classical music. I love the ebbs and flows of the classical music, how there's the dips and then it comes up and then it drops. And you can, if you think about it in that way, you can then create an ebb and flow within the actual structure. And what that allows is that readers won't typically pick that up, but they'll feel it. Like they're not going to cognitively be like, oh, if I was playing a violin right now, this would be like note A. But the feeling of it flows. It has that ebb and flow. That's what they're looking for, right? Every reader wants an experience when they read a book. So give them an experience by thinking outside of just writing words. What emotions are you trying to evoke? What does it look like? What does it feel like for them? One of the best things that I've kind of discovered over my years of writing and editing is that people either hate long paragraphs or they love their long paragraphs. I don't know why people enjoy these 500 long paragraphs. Don't do that. One, it creates a giant wall of text no one wants to read, and I can promise you they will skip over it. They'll be like, boop, 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 boop. Yep, don't know what happened, but hey, someone
Yep.
died. Oh, well, anyway, carrying on with the rest of the story.
It makes my
Don't-
brain very happy when I get through paragraphs quickly or when I get through pages quickly. I'm the kind of person that
Yep.
loves a bigger font and bigger spaced book because when I'm like, oh my gosh, look at me and I'm reading so fast. You know, I think it's the
Right.
same concept. Brain goes, oh, look at me getting through this plot.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Versus like the Iliad, where it takes up every square inch of margin. And
And I'm like, I
the
know
font
I
is
just
like
read that
pinpoint.
already, but I feel like I need to go back and read it again 3 more times because what?
Yeah, and all of the words are stacked directly on top of each other. It's fantastic. But the sweet spot for paragraph length, and I'm talking specifically about the longer paragraphs, is between 75 and 100 words. 120 is the max. Do not pass 120 words. You can maybe fudge 130 if you're doing something very, very specific and intentional. The vast majority of the of time, it's too much, way too much. And you can actually break it up, that description, into multiple paragraphs that are smaller, easier to read, easier to take in, and you can create that ebb and flow by having a longer sentence, a shorter sentence, a mid-range sentence, a shorter sentence, a longer sentence, or a really long sentence. But just doing it like one big wall is not going to work. Creating that ebb and flow is what your ideal goal is when it comes to sentence structure. Otherwise, you're going to lose people. I've done too many edits on too many books that had these obnoxiously long paragraphs. And I was like, no one's going to read this. But no one, not a soul. Not a soul.
I'm curious to know why you've included personification in here.
That's a good question. I think someone came in and added it later. So I would love your guys' take on that if you have an idea, because when it comes to sentence structure, personification, I equate it to author voice, your personality. That would be my take on it, is your voice in the paragraph, in the sentence, in the wording. And that would fall under more of kind of like the narration, the personification of the characters, and how, kind of like what Vincent was saying, if it's first person, that is the person who we're seeing through. So, and even if you're doing multiple POV, the personification of that person should be in the text, how they say things. If they speak in cliches, that should be how the text reads. That would be my take on it.
Yeah, this one is a hard one for me because it involves paying attention to your voice across the entire work, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. And the hard part about fiction that's like slightly different is, especially with characters, you want to show consistency, but you also want to show character growth. And so that can be hard because you want to show realistic growth throughout the hero's journey, but you also don't want to do something that's completely outside of something you think the character would do. Now, of course, you've created them in your head so they can do whatever you want, but you don't want to lose a reader's interest because you've created unrealistic and inconsistent scenarios.
Yeah. Steven, you said multiple POVs, and that automatically reminded me, I do not recommend writing multiple POVs for your first book. That's what I did. And it's torture. It is not fun, especially when you're trying to nail your own style and your own tone. You're still figuring out what that is. And then you're having to bring in different perspectives and spins on that constantly with a bunch of changing chapters. It's really, really hard to find the balance between making the character pop and building their arc and having it fit them, and then having it fit an overall tone that actually works and makes sense for the whole story. That is very, very tough to pull off. I don't know if I pulled it off, but I don't recommend doing that. But one thing that is interesting is, do you guys think chapter length How much do you think chapter length goes under this as well? Because I always notice chapter length is a big one when I'm reading. If the chapter's too long, I might put the book down, pick it back up in a week.
Yep.
I do have thoughts on this because in my nonfiction book, I kind of felt like I could do whatever I want. And the chapter length kind of varied a lot, like very dramatically. Versus with my fiction book, they all tend to stay somewhere around 2,000 words. And that's like the chef's kiss spot of chapter length. You don't really want it to be that much longer because, again, it's the happy brain thought, right? Of getting through a plot moment and getting through a chapter. If you're making it far beyond 2,000 words, you're like, gee, where's this going? How much do I, when I hear that a book has, 36 chapters, I'm like, wow. But in my brain, I'm like, it's not going to be as long as I think. It's not going to be an 800-page book. It's going to be something different. But if I hear a book only has 8 chapters, I'm like, oh, I'm scared.
Yeah. I did.
Great Expectations is a great example of this. By Charles Dickens. It has a lot of chapters. It gets up into like the 30s, and it is a relatively thick boy, but it's not bad.
Similar to Tolstoy too. A lot of the big chunkier ones.
As thick as this.
Yeah.
What are we looking at here?
This is Halen's Ballad. This is a pre-order that I just got yesterday, which I'm super excited about. It's like over 700 pages. It's massive.
There's Great Expectations, doodled by High School Mackenzie. Been massacred.
Yeah, I am in agreement with the chapter length, especially when it comes to your first draft. Because again, we're talking about self-editing tips, how to improve. Don't go over. Well, I won't say don't. I recommend shooting for chapter lengths for your first draft between 1,500 and 2,500 words. Stick with that. That gives yourself a little bit of wiggle room. And then as far as when you go into the second draft and you're really kind of fleshing the story out and stuff like that, you're needing to add a little bit more, increase it to from 1,500 to 3,500 on the high end. 3,500 words equates out to approximately a 15-minute read time. And that's how I base my chapters. Because Mackenzie's spot on is that there's a little dopamine release every time you finish a chapter. And so basically what you are trying to do is become someone's book drug dealer. That is the ultimate goal. And this is the reason why you can pace things differently. I have multiple sections within my book that take place over about 4 chapters in one place. Granted, I have multiple POVs, so I'm exploring it typically from different POVs in each chapter. But we stay in that same place, but because of the pacing, it allows me to continue to move the story forward without it feeling like we've been bogged down in this area for like ever. Like the Council of Elrond, it goes on forever and doesn't end. It's like 50 pages. It's ridiculous. So that would be my recommendation, is keep the chapter lengths no more than 3,500 words. Yeah, it might mean that you have more chapters. Guess what?
Which is fine.
No one will care. 0 cares per head over more chapters. If it's taking them, let's see, because I've had people read my book in 3 hours. So 3 hours for some people to get through an 88,000 word long novel, right? That's pretty good. And I have 40 chapters. They didn't care. Now, if it took them 6 hours to get through 8 chapters, that's going to be a problem. And I've done an edit for a 90,000 word sci-fi novel that had 3 chapters. Just 3. I'll let you guys do the math on that one. I'm lucky I'm still sane.
Did it have little breaks within the chapters, like in terms of numbering or anything like that? Or was it just extra indentation?
massive
Wow.
chapters.
That's long. That's
Yeah.
long.
Maybe a scene break here and there, but
Yeah.
it didn't matter. It didn't matter.
Good. That's called a part, not a chapter.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we have a question here.
Yeah.
Kyra asks, is there a difference between a chapter length and a place for a chapter break? In other words, when in doubt, make it a new chapter. It's a good question. I think that, like, within my book, most of my average word count per chapter over 40 chapters is about 1,900 words. My goal was to hit at least 2,000 for every single chapter. And I sometimes will have 1 or 2 scene breaks within those chapters. So I don't think it matters as much about where you put the scene breaks, as long as it makes sense for the story. Like if you're doing from day to day, or from one point travel time as a scene break, picking back up because nothing really of significance happened during that time. Those are little ways that you can kind of break up within a single chapter. But for bigger, more important events, I would say lead up to it, end chapter with a little mini cliffhanger that leads into the next chapter.
Scene break acrobatics is a very interesting thing to me. I was reading a book recently because what I'm used to is, if, like Stephen was just saying, if you take a break and then there might be like a couple little dots, like a, an embellishment of some sort, and then you're in a new location in a completely new scene. But I was reading a book the other day where literally the immediate next paragraph or the next line, you're in a completely different place. And I was like, I'm sorry, where are we? But the interesting part the pattern that I noticed was she would be talking about the end of a party. And then in literally the next paragraph, I opened the door into my home. And you're like, okay, when it's a logical jump that makes complete sense. Like, what are you going to do after a party? Go home? Then you don't necessarily have to put that embellishment break. But if you're like, I boarded a ship, and this began my fabulous journey, ... I awoke in the middle of an island, naked and alone and afraid. And you're like, I'm sorry. That warrants a little bit of a scene break there. And also
on Discovery Channel. Congratulations.
Right. But so then, then deciding where you want to end a chapter and begin a new one, also kind of, it's a gut check on what plot point do you want to happen? What primary point do you want to happen in your chapter? Has it already happened or has it not? Are you still building up to it? And that will help you kind of decide where your chapter breaks.
Vincent, any thoughts on that one?
I just remember writing one of the chapters in my book and building towards something that I really didn't want to show. It was a scene that was really violent and I didn't want to glorify it. And so something that I did intentionally, if anybody's facing this similar scenario, building towards that event, but cutting off right before it happens. And then with the chapter break, people refresh and you can have a new angle on that event that allows you to not have to continue in that same buildup and momentum, because otherwise you're going to have to do that. You have to give the reader that payoff that you're building towards. Otherwise it's jarring and not in a good way.
Yep.
Unless you want to be, that's another sneaky tactic you can use with changing point of views.
Yep.
Yeah, true. Yeah. And that's another thing. So going back to the changing point of views things, I don't want to discourage people from writing changing point of views. I really enjoyed it in a lot of ways, but that's where the challenge sort of comes in too, is you have to be able to use it effectively each time you do it. And that's what makes it hard, because you're forcing yourself to use that stylistically every time. And you have to make each one purposeful. Otherwise it's not worth it.
Yep. And actually, I think that's a great lead into consistent tone. So tenses, POV, and writing style. So since we're talking about, well, for one, Vincent, you had mentioned first person earlier, and the one that drives me up a wall is first person present tense.
Yeah.
I despise it with every fiber of my being. And the reason is, it's not the tense itself. It's the fact that people have done it so bad, so many times, that it just drives me up a wall.
It's hard to write in too, because when you really think about it, present is a fleeting moment in time. Most of everything is the past.
Yep. Yeah, and the ones that I have seen, they're always like, and then I make the eggs, and I pour the milk into the glass, and I sip the cool and refreshing glass of milk that I pour now. And I'm like, oh, just it drives me nuts. Now, first person past tense, I will eat that up all day long. It always flows better. The other one is second person, which is like letter form, which is incredibly tricky to do. And again, usually not done well when that's the entire book. Those have been done well. I've just not seen a lot of them, and people really don't write in that style a lot. Third person present tense is a thing, apparently. Not sure. I'm still the jury's out on how I feel about that one. Because I feel I haven't read enough of those. Basically it's like it's more narrative. It's more of just the narrator in front of you telling you what is happening is more of the sense. Third person.
The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway is written in second person.
Okay. Yeah. And I think C.S. Lewis did some second person with Screw Tape Letters, but I would have to look that over again because I don't remember for sure.
A more modern example, I believe All the Light We Cannot See, I forget the name of the author, is written also in second person. But the idea is that like the author or narrator is sitting in front of you telling you, and they probably use the word you a lot in that narration style.
Yeah.
Like, do you ever wonder if this was what life was meant to be like? You know, asking the reader directly.
Yep. Yeah. And then there's third person omniscient, which is more along the lines of Tolkien, which just please, for the love of all that's holy, don't try to do omniscient. Because
it means you have to know everything. It means you have to know everything about the story, and that you have to you don't have to convey everything to your reader, but it means that because you establish that power, it almost ends up being your responsibility to give all that information and to know it all.
That will happen with info dumping.
Yep.
That is the number one cause of info dumping in America.
Yep.
Is
omniscient.
Yeah. And so I don't recommend trying to do that. And two, because we as authors try to get into the heads of our characters, and you cannot do that. You cannot do that in omniscience. You have to remain the omnipresent narrator of the story. You don't go into why Sam did what he did, or how he was feeling, or, you know, how little sleep he got, or, you know, him drinking his glass of milk and how that made him feel all warm and fuzzy inside. You don't get to go into those details. It is all high level stuff.
You're looking from above, narrating exactly what happens as it happens, and also going, little did he know that his future he would be screwed over.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then there's the third person limited point of view, which is more kind of just over the shoulder for the character. You're more in their head. This is the style that I like and I find easier to write in, because it allows me to actually transition easily from character to character with scene breaks and such, and chapters.
I personally like. Oh, go ahead, Vinny.
No, go for it. I was gonna divert.
I was gonna say I personally like first person past tense and narrating in that way, because I can know a lot about the world that I've created. I can do all the world building, and I can know everything I need to know about the characters in order to write the story. But my character, the main character, only knows so much. And that really keeps me from creating super long paragraphs that are unnecessary, because I go, wait, she doesn't know that. She's a college student who's fresh out on her own in this adventure. So she needs to learn it from someone else. So then I'll take another character and they might go off on this nerd thing that I wanted to explain, this history fact. So that happens a couple times in my book, but that's to teach the main character what's happening and also to teach the reader about a history fact or what's going on.
Yep.
That is interesting. Yeah, because I like that, especially for historical pieces. And I did historical fiction. And I did the same. I did first person past tense, let's say, for each point of view that I did. And I really enjoyed it. Although I must throw a bone towards first person present for our fellow author coach Kyra down in the comments who's writing it. I did a short story in it, and it was tough because I know what you're saying, Stephen. Like it's almost like noir mystery novels. At the opening, it's like, I walk down the street, like I smell the smoke coming out of the sewer or whatever, and it just has this kind of, it almost is like a cliche in and of itself in some ways, and it can become that. But I think if it's done really well, it can pop more than past tense and feel less passive. And at least that was something that I ran into a lot when I was writing with past tense, was just the passiveness of every action could become dull, and you had to find a lot of other things to make it engaging. And the dialogue had to come
about passive voice.
Exactly. Yeah. Passive voice in and of itself just becoming a problem. So
that is,
I think maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Do you guys think that if you do it, let's say a first person present, for all the problems that might come up, do you think that makes it easier to avoid like passive voice?
No. I think passive voice is really hard to work with in general. What's hilarious is my natural inclination that I am actively fighting against constantly is to write in first person present tense. I don't know why that is my natural inclination. I cannot explain it. If I do some more psychological digging into my past history of writing, I could tell you. But my editor was like, you got to pick one. Like, you're starting to flip flop a little bit. And I've noticed that present tense is what you're primarily using, but I would recommend that you don't. And I was like, okay, you got it. So it's training your brain to pick a tense, be consistent, and stick to it.
Yep. Yep. And that is the biggest issue that I have seen with the majority of, again, I'm talking about the poorly written ones, but they will ebb and flow between present and past tense word use. So when it should have been has, it's had, or some other variation. And again, it's the little words. It's the little ones. It's not usually the bigger ones, because it's how we would naturally describe something that had happened, but you're trying to describe it as if it is happening. And that in and of itself causes a lot of issues, and you have to be so careful doing first person present tense, because it is so easy to do. And really, like, as you're going through it, like, the best thing that you can do for self-editing against this is like Control F or Command F and search for has or had, if you're doing first person present tense, for instance. And then it'll bring up all of the hads, and then you can look at it. It's like, oh, yep, that was supposed to be first person. That was supposed to be present. That was supposed to be present. That was supposed to be, hey, I got one right. That was supposed to be present. That was supposed to be present.
The thing that I have the hardest time with is telling the story from the perspective of my character, right? And we're talking first person, past tense. Are they telling it as it's happening, even though it's past tense? Or are they telling it sitting in front of you several years after the fact about this thing that happened? So are they going to give you hints to future events as you're narrating, or are they not? You know?
Yep. Or have they written it down in a book that you are now reading? Fun fact. One of my favorite trilogies that of all time, Lord of the Rings is not it. It is one of them. Is the Song of Albion trilogy by Stephen R. Lawhead. first person, past tense. And the opening line for book 1 is, it all started with an oryx, or it all began with an oryx. And you follow this, it's like Celtic high fantasy, and by the time you get to the end of book 3, you see the character Lewis sit down and type out, "It all began with an oryx," and my mind was just like I was like, that is genius. And that is why I will go back to that trilogy every single time, because it's you don't know that it's him literally writing out in book form, and you're reading the book until you get to the end of book 3. I love that as a style.
That's very beautiful. That's cyclical and very nice.
Yep.
It's making me kick myself. It's making me kick myself because I tried to do that. I tried to do that with my book, in that I had bookends where the main protagonist, whose point of view I use the most, is speaking in present tense right at the beginning, and it's a flash forward, so to speak, and then he brings you back. But then I try to leave it to ambiguity, drop logic, and it switches to a bunch of different characters, and you're sort of like, wait, are they writing journals too? I don't really understand. And my sort of answer is just, hey, just have fun with it. Just enjoy it. Just keep reading. Don't worry about it. And I never answer it, because that was my intention, is that I think it's kind of fun just as a device, just to get it going. And I personally don't feel like it needs to be answered. And then I come back around to it by the end. And at least for him, it sort of makes sense. But then I'm just kicking myself in a way, because I'm thinking about that trilogy and how it's very purposeful in its design to begin and end with that as a technique. And I think if there's something I could change about my book, is going back, rethinking, making that a little bit more purposeful, and not just leaving it to, well, I'm going to use it because it's fun.
Right.
I don't know. It's an interesting thing to bring up.
Yeah. And this is the thing that, when it comes to we're talking very broad terms here, and even with under the umbrella of self-editing, but these are the types of things that we hope you guys who are watching either now or later will be able to kind of take and apply to the editing that you're going to be doing, because there is so much when it comes to self-editing. You have to remove yourself from it enough to be able to look at it analytically and critically, while also being able to still think of the big picture creative that is going on, that you have planned overall. And it's a fine balance between the two. And so that actually, to think of like writing style, I know a lot of authors will talk about, I don't read while I'm writing, because I don't want the author to affect my writing style, and be like, you should absolutely want people to affect your writing style. Absolutely. Tolkien, huge influence, and affected my writing style with world building. Ted Dekker was a huge influence on my desire for pacing. Stephen R. Lawhead for the rich lore and cultures, especially because so much of book 1 is heavily influenced by Celtic cultures, to pull those in. I'm now reading through Stephen R. Donaldson's book, The Mirror in Her Dreams. And I'm like, man, what can I glean from this? What things can I take from this, and how I use words and build the world and all that kind of stuff. You should have things affecting your writing style. If you're not, you're stagnating. Because honestly, you're not that interesting. I'm not that interesting. We have to learn and to grow, and we do that by reading. I'm reading that stuff while I'm working on two stories, book 2 and the short story series. And I'm going to be able to take that and learn from it and adapt it and put it into my stories. So when it comes to writing style, one, you're always going to find your author voice. As long as you keep doing it, you keep asking people specific questions. And really like that's one of the most important things is that you read and you read a lot, and you don't read a lot of the books on Amazon that are for free or that look like their covers were made by Aunt Betsy. Read classics. Read the classics. They're not all going to be politically correct. It was a sign of the times. It is what it is. Get over it. But what you can take from that is, how did they use language? How did they create that experience for the reader? And then you take and you pull from it what makes sense for you and your writing, and develop your writing style purposefully. You're not going to find it by accident.
Yeah, I've read more this year than I ever have in my life. Like more books by choice, because I'm going and I'm reading things that I'm drawn to that I know are going to inspire my writing. So if I see something that's writing historical fiction, if I see something that's writing about museums, if I see something that writes about time travel, I mean, I want to eat that up as much as possible, because those are things that are relevant to me and the story that I'm trying to build. I want to learn how other people write about them.
I'm so excited to be out of school. Not kidding in so many ways, because now I get to read fiction again, and now I get to do it in a way that's
you get to read what you
purposeful to me.
want and not what you're forced to read.
Right. And that's the other thing too, is I find myself not staying in one lane, and there's a lot you can pick up by reading other genres to apply to whatever you're doing there that you may not have expected. And so then within a genre, your book could seem super unique and super cool, but you're still pulling from things, and great artists always steal. Obviously, they don't plagiarize. They pick up things and learn and pull what they like in a way that's unique. But yeah, that being said, it's really, really valuable to keep reading even while you're writing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And tools to help you guys. So I have done and used Grammarly and ProWritingAid for a couple of years now. But Vincent and Mackenzie, have you used these? And if so, what has been the biggest help for you by using them?
So I have not used ProWritingAid. I have used Grammarly. I turned off the plugin because I found it annoying and invasive whenever I was trying to write like tweets, especially because the whole thing about Twitter is no grammar. Okay. So Grammarly, leave me alone. But Grammarly is really great for kind of like I like to use it as a final go through. Like after I've looked at it and I feel confident that I found everything I could possibly find, I like to give it to Grammarly and have them tell me, no, stupid, here's all the things wrong, and then go back and fix those. And what's great about, like, if you're able to get Grammarly Premium, which I have let that subscription lapse, but if you can get that even for a time period, like a trial, and go and, you have all this stuff prepared and use the trial. What's great about the premium is they find very special nuanced things wrong with your work outside of just regular grammar and spelling. They'll find run-on sentences, comma splices, passive voice, and then give you suggestions on how to fix those. So those are a lot more complicated than just, hey, you spelled this word wrong, or did you mean to here instead of to, or there instead of there, all those things.
I've never used ProWritingAid. I don't know much about it, but with Grammarly, I did give it a try. I will say this, maybe not everybody's like this. I'm already of the feeling that when I'm typing a book, I'm losing a little bit of the fun I would have writing it with a pen and pen and paper or pencil and paper. And to keep adding on more add-ons or more programs or this or that, for me, it's very distracting, even if it is helpful. So I don't use Grammarly. I rely on whatever, let's say I'm using Google Docs. I'll just rely on the spell check. And then the benefit of having a publisher was having an editor who helped me with the editing process. But if you're self-editing your novel, if you're fully self-publishing and you're doing every step yourself, I can definitely see what you're saying, Mackenzie, with adding Grammarly as like a final pass-through as a help in your editing. Although
it's not turned on while I'm writing.
Yeah.
It's turned on at the end. Yeah.
Yes. Because that's the thing I noticed too, is we've been talking in this live stream series about how mixing writing and editing can sometimes be very harmful. Most of the time is very harmful because it's two different processes. And if you have Grammarly on while you're actually drafting the book, you're gonna loop yourself back into editing. I guarantee nobody can overcome that temptation to pull back in and edit what they've just seen if they see a bunch of red or a bunch of marks. I mean, I don't know how you'd be able to do it, but I do see a purpose for these tools. I just have yet to use them for myself effectively.
Yeah. So one of the things that that I have done over the years is, and when I've recommended the use, Grammarly is, I'll go over some pros. One, it's free. I like free. Grammarly, you could do it all for free. It will give you the very basics. And honestly, like I had Grammarly Premium for a long time. And the reason I bought it was to get some of the extra like comma issues, because I don't do commas well. And I've learned since using Grammarly, because it yelled at me enough. But then they moved that to just the free version, and I was like, the frick am I paying $140 a month or a year for? Like, shit.
Whoa!
Hopefully not
Yeah,
a month, a year. It's a year.
Yeah, and I was just like, like even with like the goals and you know, the tone, you know, which are still kind of beta things, that wasn't enough for me. So I was like, I'll just do it for free. Now the cons for Grammarly is that it is overly simple. It is a very simplified process. Which I guess the flip side of that would be the pro, is that it's very user friendly. It's very easy to use and to kind of find different things. This is how I developed my writing process and figuring out the chapter lengths, because you can actually go to goals and or your score that it gives you. Don't shoot for 100%, because it's usually going to change everything beyond the point of like normal language. Because AI, believe it or not, is not as smart as most humans. So I would look at the read time for my book, and I was like, perfect. I'm in that 7 to 10 minute range. Excellent. And then I look at speaking time, because I knew I wanted to have an audiobook, and the speaking time was super important to me. And so most of them average between 15 and 20 minutes for speaking time. Now, ironically enough, I never told that to my narrator when she was doing the audiobook, but she nailed it almost to the T on every single book. So just a fun tool there. It'll also tell you the grade level that you are currently writing in. So if you're like, oh my gosh, it's only 6th grade, that's okay. It just means more people are able to read it. The average American literally has a 7th grade reading level. So you writing like Tolkien or Hemingway is probably going to go over the vast majority of people's heads at this point, which is sad. Now, when it comes to ProWritingAid, I'll start off with the biggest con is that it is more expensive. However, if you can get in on one of their Black Friday deals or one of their holiday deals and you get the lifetime, that's worth its weight in gold. Because I ended up on one of their Black Friday deals a couple of years ago, getting in it was like $200 for 50 years. I will be old, senile, and in a home, losing my mind and talking to my characters by the time that this thing expires. So it was perfect. Now,
Wow.
ProWritingAid is extensive. It is massive. The reports that it can generate. I actually did a full-length tutorial on how to set it up for authors. That's over on my YouTube channel, The Editing Bard. So you guys can go and find that. But it's like an hour long, and I walk you through how to set everything up. It is in depth, guys. It is next level. The way that I kind of equate it is that Grammarly is great for draft 1. ProWritingAid is great for draft 2. When you need to really kind of sharpen it up a little bit more, it gives more in-depth. Plus, Grammarly Free works inside it. So you get 2 for the price of 1, which I like. I will actually go through and I will, because I use Word and the ProWritingAid extension, I always turn it on as I'm writing, because what I want to do is I want to create as clean of a first draft as I can without actually doing a full edit. So it's like, oh, look, 200 of your quotation marks are curly and one of or two of them are straight. Like I'm going to be able to find those. Make all curly. Done. When I'm using too much passive voice, I can look at it and go, okay, I really should just address that now while I'm here. And actually in doing so, it helps me rearrange, because then I can create a better flow for the rest of the sentences. So I do tend to work with it on, but I don't do a full-blown edit. I will use the editing tools later to really dive in and find like the echoes. So where I've used the same language repeatedly close together. Oh my gosh, so many echoes. It was like a freaking echo chamber when I put my second draft in there. It was just like, what am I doing? I'm just repeating myself. So, and that's actually helped me not do that or be more cognizant of that. And so I get less of those things overall. So this is the thing with tools, is that they're there to help you learn from your mistakes, so that way you make less mistakes. Don't rely on it to tell you what's wrong.
Yeah.
Learn what's wrong, learn how to fix what's wrong, and then it won't yell at you nearly as much. And you learn to write better. It's
And
great.
that's why you watched this live stream.
Ta-da!
Full circle.
Full circle, baby. All right. Any other closing thoughts for you guys?
Self-editing is an important step in the writing process. Like we've mentioned, there are all these other tools to help you. There are editors too that are going to help you, but it can't be all on them. It can't be all on the tool, like Stephen just said, and it can't be all on the editor. So there's a lot of accountability in you looking over the work that you've produced, which can be painful, but absolutely necessary.
Well said. I would add, yeah, you got to be an editor, no matter what kind of route your book takes and where you go with it, whether it's traditional or self or any sort of path you're going to take. It's definitely a necessary skill.
Yeah, the main thing when it comes to self-editing is always taking your time. You cannot rush editing. I don't care if a New York Times bestseller told you, I got my manuscript edited in like 2 weeks. They're idiots. If they got it done in 2 weeks, they are morons. Because that just simply does not work. I don't care how fast your brain works.
Simply.
One does not simply edit their book in 2 weeks. You have to take your time. You have to be thoughtful about it. I recommend, again, with the through the writing process, the biggest component is getting the draft done and out of your head, then going back to it and looking through it critically, analytically, and saying, is what is here enough, or does it need more, and does it make sense? And if that all lines up, great. Where are the plot holes? You have plot holes. Every author has a plot hole. You can minimize plot holes. You can use like a magic eraser on some of them. You may not get rid of it fully, but it's going to get rid of most of it. But you definitely have to take your time. Vincent, did you have a question?
Yeah, sort of. When you said one does not simply, it made me think, are memes going to become the new cliches? Meme quotes. And Mackenzie, with your meme experience, I mean, it's decades from now, people are going to wonder what the context was, but they'll still have their random meanings.
At what point does a meme become a cliche and a cliche vice versa? I You're asking the real big questions here, and I've already expended much of my brain energy on the rest of this. So we're going to revisit that and come back to it later, but I'll leave that with you for something to think about.
We're going to put a pin in that and
Yeah.
then come back to that conversation later. Do that as a live stream. Just be like, so memes as cliches. That's nothing to do with writing, but that's okay. It's the questions that need answers. Awesome. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for participating in this live stream and talking about self-editing. For those of you who are watching, if you have additional questions about self-editing, please drop them in the comments below. We are happy to answer these. We enjoy answering questions about this kind of stuff. We could stream all day just talking about writing stuff and still have more things to talk about, like cliches and memes. So if you guys want to make sure that you're staying up to date with everything, head down and hit the little subscribe notification button over here in this general area, and the bell notification icon. Monday, we are going to be back at it doing the editing live stream. And in addition to that, if you want your work edited or critiqued or given feedback, the form is down below. So make sure you go and you fill out that form. It's limited to 150 words because we only have so much time. And so definitely go down and do that. And feel free to hit us up on social media. We're basically everywhere. And we would love to talk with you guys. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your night, a fantastic weekend. Submit the stuff down below. Do it, guys. All right, everybody. Have a great night. We'll see you Monday.